Elara couldn't breathe. The words Cade had just spoken hung in the air like a heavy fog, and in that moment she realized everything she had known about love, about her marriage, had been twisted. Cade's gaze never wavered as he explained, "It's been a test," his voice devoid of emotion. A test? Elara's mind raced as she tried to comprehend the reality he had just revealed. The silence between them, the distance that had grown over the past few months, wasn't because of stress or his father's health. No, it was all deliberate, calculated. He had been pushing her away to see if she would stay, if she would remain loyal in the face of his coldness. She felt a sharp pang of betrayal. He had tested her loyalty, her love. All the nights she had cried herself to sleep, hoping for his touch, for some sign that he still cared, had been nothing more than part of his game. This wasn't a marriage. This was a manipulation. "How could you think this was love?" Elara whispered, her voice shaking. She wasn't just hurt, she was crushed. How could the man she had loved, trusted, and shared a life with use her emotions as a test? Welcome, everyone, to Midnight Story Vault, where we dive deep into the emotional complexity of relationships. If you're new here, I'm so glad you've joined us on this journey, and for those returning, thank you for your continued support. Tonight, we unravel a story of love, betrayal, and self-discovery. It's a journey that will challenge your understanding of trust, loyalty, and what it truly means to love someone. You won't want to miss how it all unfolds. But before we dive deeper into Elara's emotional journey, let me ask you, what would you do if your partner, the one you thought you knew, suddenly turned cold, testing your loyalty? How would you react to such a deep betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all our latest stories. Elara's heart was heavy as she sat in stunned silence. Her mind struggled to piece together the months of emotional distance, wondering why it all happened, only to hear that it had been a test, a twisted way for Cade to measure her loyalty. She had been loyal, hadn't she? She had loved him unconditionally, had stood by his side through all the ups and downs of their 6 years together. Yet here she was, betrayed by the very man she thought she knew. His coldness, his silence, all had been part of a game. It was an unsettling truth. But as the weight of his words settled in, Elara realized that she wasn't just facing the end of a marriage. She was facing the destruction of the woman she once was, someone who allowed herself to be manipulated. But she was stronger than that. She had to be. And that strength would be the key to her future. Cade had set the stage for her transformation. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about reclaiming her own power. And in doing so, Elara would learn something far more valuable than loyalty, the value of self-love and independence. Elara lay awake in the silence of their bedroom, staring at the ceiling, the weight of Cade's words still echoing in her mind. "It's been a test." The phrase clung to her thoughts, refusing to let go. She had spent weeks questioning herself, wondering what she had done wrong, trying to make sense of Cade's coldness. But now that the truth had been revealed, it felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. She had tried everything, reaching out to him, offering him space, suggesting counseling. All of it had been rejected. Cade, once the man she had trusted with every part of her, now seemed like a stranger. The man who had once held her close, whispered sweet things in her ear, had now distanced himself so completely that even his touch felt like an impossibility. As the days turned into weeks, Elara's confusion only deepened. She had tried to make excuses for him, stress from work, his father's health, but nothing explained the emotional distance that had crept between them. It was as if he had become a ghost in their marriage, hovering but never truly present. Her thoughts drifted back to the last few months. The empty dinners, the quiet nights spent in the same bed but miles apart, the cold shoulders in their once lively conversations. She had tried so hard to fix it, to make him see that she was still here, still fighting for them. But nothing she did seemed to matter. "Cade, what's happening?" she had asked, her voice barely above a whisper during one of those silent nights, the desperation creeping into her tone. He had just looked at her, his eyes dull and distant, and shrugged. "Nothing, Elara. I'm just tired. Tired." That was all he had to say. But she knew, deep down, it wasn't just tiredness. It was something deeper, something she couldn't reach. His emotional withdrawal had been so gradual, so subtle, that she hadn't noticed until it was too late. Now, as she lay in their bed, the same bed they had shared for 6 years, she couldn't help but feel the sting of abandonment. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She had spent too many nights crying alone, too many nights searching for answers that never came. It was all too much. She needed to know the truth. She had to confront him. The next evening, after another long day of silence, Ilara decided she couldn't wait any longer. She had to know. As Cade sat at the edge of the bed, fiddling with his phone, she took a deep breath and spoke the words she had been holding in for so long. "You've been shutting me out, Cade," she said softly, but firmly. She needed him to hear the pain in her voice, to feel the depth of the hurt she had been carrying. Cade didn't look up from his phone. "I know," he said, his tone flat. "I'm just dealing with a lot right now." That response. It had been the same excuse for months, and Ilara couldn't take it anymore. "You keep saying that, but it's not enough," she pressed, her voice gaining strength. "What's really going on, Cade? Why are you shutting me out like this?" He put his phone down slowly, his face hardening as he turned to face her. The silence between them felt like a wall, as if he were building an impenetrable fortress around himself. "I needed to see if you would stay with me," he said, his voice void of warmth. "To see if you were really loyal to me when everything else was falling apart." Ilara's chest tightened as the weight of his words hit her like a punch. "What do you mean, loyal? You've been shutting me out for months, Cade, and now you're telling me it was all just a test." "Yes," he replied coldly, almost matter-of-factly. "I had to know if you'd stick around or if you'd leave like everyone else who's ever abandoned me." "It's a test, Ilara, a loyalty test." Her heart felt like it had stopped beating. She stared at him, unable to comprehend what he had just said. A test. He had been deliberately pushing her away, treating her with indifference, to see if she would stay, to see if she was loyal to him. "How could you think this was love?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. He simply sat there, his face unreadable, as if he hadn't just broken her heart into a million pieces. "Has someone ever pushed you away emotionally? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments below." The silence in the room felt suffocating, the weight of Cade's words still lingering in the air. Ilara stared at him, trying to process what he had just confessed, but her mind was spinning. How could this have been a test? The emotional distance between them had grown so wide that it felt impossible to cross. Yet here he was, calmly explaining that it had all been deliberate. A test. Her hands clenched into fists as she stood up, the anger rising in her chest, pushing the tears back. This was too much. She had tried everything to fix this. She had asked him time and time again what was wrong, trying to understand, trying to help. And now he was telling her that all of it, the coldness, the emotional withdrawal, the silence, was just a game. "Is that it, Cade?" Ilara's voice was firm now, no longer trembling. "You've been treating me like this, pushing me away, just to see if I'd stay. You wanted to test my loyalty?" Cade didn't answer right away. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. For a moment, Ilara saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it quickly faded. "Why didn't you just tell me what was going on?" Ilara demanded, her voice rising. "Why didn't you trust me enough to talk to me about it instead of—" She broke off, the words too painful to finish. "Because I had to know." Cade's voice was low now, almost apologetic, but there was no warmth behind it. "I needed to know if you would stay with me when things got tough, if you were truly loyal to me, no matter how I treated you." Ilara shook her head, her heart breaking. Loyalty? That's what this was about. Not love, not connection, but loyalty. "You think I didn't love you enough? That I wasn't here for you?" She felt the tears welling up, but she pushed them away. She wouldn't let him see her break. "All this time, I thought it was something I did, something wrong with me. I've been miserable, Cade, and now you're telling me it was all a test." His face was stone cold, like a mask had settled over it. "It wasn't about you, Ilara," he said, his tone emotionless. "It was about proving that you'd stick around when things got hard. I needed to see if you'd stay, if you'd be loyal." A bitter laugh escaped Ilara's lips, but there was no humor in it. "Loyalty. You've been cruel to me, Cade. You've shut me out. And now you're telling me it was a test? You've broken me. And now you want me to prove my loyalty." Her voice cracked at the last word, the full weight of the situation finally crashing down on her. "Don't you see?" Cade's voice softened for the first time, but it was too little, too late. "I had to know, Ilara. I couldn't risk you leaving when things got hard. I couldn't trust anyone after everything that's happened in my life. I needed to know that you were really in this." Ilara took a step back, feeling a deep, overwhelming sense of betrayal. "I was always in this, Cade. But you—" She stopped herself, her chest tightening. "You've been treating me like I was a stranger, pushing me away when all I wanted was to love you. And now I find out it was all just a test." His face remained unmoved, the distance between them growing with every passing second. It was clear that Cade still didn't understand the depth of what he had done. To him, this was all some calculated measure, a way to ensure her loyalty. To her, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. Her voice was steady, though her heart was breaking. "I don't know who you are anymore, Cade. I don't know what you've turned me into. I can't be a part of this anymore. I won't be part of your game. Have you ever felt manipulated in a relationship? When did you reach your breaking point? Share your experience with us in the comments below." Ilara stood there, frozen, as Cade's words echoed in her mind. The man she had spent 6 years with, the man she had trusted, had been pushing her away intentionally. He hadn't just grown distant, he had set the stage for her loyalty to be tested. "You know," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm, "it doesn't make sense. Why would you do this? Why wouldn't you just talk to me? Why make it so cruel?" Cade shifted slightly, his hands still clasped tightly in his lap. He didn't meet her eyes, instead staring off into the distance, his expression unreadable. "I didn't know how else to do it," he muttered, almost as if he was trying to convince himself. "I had to know you wouldn't leave me when things got tough." Ilara felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. "When things got tough? We've had tough times before, Cade. I was there. I stayed through your father's health issues, your work stress. I stayed with you when you couldn't even talk to me. But this is a whole new level." Her voice cracked at the last words and she quickly steadied herself, trying to keep the anger from bubbling over. She had always prided herself on being a patient, understanding partner, but Cade had crossed a line that felt impossible to come back from. "You're telling me you purposely pushed me away for months, and that was all just to test me?" Her voice was a whisper now, not because she didn't want him to hear, but because the words felt so ridiculous, so painful, that she could barely bring herself to say them out loud. Cade finally looked up at her, his eyes hard but devoid of any real emotion. "Yes, it was the only way to see if you were truly loyal, Ilara. I had to make sure you were in it for the right reasons. No matter how I acted, no matter how distant I became, I had to know you wouldn't leave me when I wasn't showing up for you. You've always been so predictable. I needed to see if you'd stay, even when I wasn't giving you anything in return." Ilara's breath hitched as the realization sank in. All the nights she had spent tossing and turning, the endless questions she had asked herself, the confusion that had plagued her every moment, they had all been part of his game. His test. Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. "You thought I'd leave? You thought I was just going to walk away from everything we built together, just like that? Did you really think that of me?" "I didn't know," Cade said flatly, his gaze shifting away again. "I had to see it for myself." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Ilara's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, but somehow making everything worse. This was not about her at all. It wasn't about their relationship or the love they shared. It was about Cade's insecurities, his inability to trust, his need for control. He had turned their entire marriage into a test that only served to break her. "I don't even know who you are anymore," Ilara whispered, feeling the tears she had been holding back threaten to spill over. She wiped her eyes quickly, refusing to let him see her weak. "I thought I knew you. I thought I understood you, Cade. But this is a betrayal I can't ignore. You've made it impossible for me to trust you again." Cade didn't respond. He didn't even try to apologize. Instead, he sat there, looking like a man who had just crossed a line and didn't even realize the damage he had done. It was as if everything, every tear, every sleepless night, every plea for him to come back to her, had meant nothing. "You used me, Cade," Elara said quietly, more to herself than to him. "I was never part of your test. I was just a pawn in your game." Her chest tightened as she struggled to breathe, the weight of it all pressing down on her. Cade's face remained impassive, the coldness between them now so thick that it felt like an impenetrable wall. She stood up, her legs shaky beneath her, her heart breaking with every step. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't stay in a marriage built on manipulation and distrust. "You've made your choice," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "and I have to make mine." Have you ever felt manipulated in a relationship? What was the breaking point for you? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. The days blurred together for Elara. It wasn't just the absence of Cade's affection. It was the emptiness in the spaces he once occupied, the silence between them, the absence of any genuine connection. For weeks now, she had existed in a fog, unable to fully grasp the reality of what had happened, or why Cade had subjected her to such a cruel test. She barely ate. The weight loss was gradual at first, a few pounds slipping away unnoticed until she saw herself in the mirror one morning and realized her face looked thinner, her skin a little more sallow. Her reflection seemed foreign to her, as though she were looking at someone she didn't recognize, someone who was breaking and yet couldn't stop. Elara had always been a strong woman, independent, capable, grounded. But this was different. The pain of betrayal cut deeper than anything she had ever known. It wasn't just the abandonment by Cade. It was the realization that the man she had trusted, the man she had married, had manipulated her into believing their love was genuine, only to have it stripped away for a test that she hadn't even known she was part of. Every night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart racing, her mind replaying the same conversations with Cade over and over. It's been a test. How could she sleep knowing that? How could she close her eyes when every part of her ached, every part of her screamed for a resolution, for understanding? But there was none, just more unanswered questions, more coldness. She hadn't been able to sleep in days. The ticking of the clock on her nightstand, loud and unforgiving, only reminded her of the time wasted, time she would never get back. She used to drift off into Cade's arms, the warmth of his presence offering comfort. Now, his side of the bed was cold and untouched, as if he had never been there at all. It was as though their shared life had dissolved into nothing, leaving only her, alone in the quiet. Elara's thoughts began to spiral. What was wrong with me? She asked herself every morning, her reflection a reminder of the guilt she had tried to carry. She tried to focus on the positives, telling herself she was strong enough to get through it, to move on. But it was hard when everything around her felt like a reminder of her pain. "Are you okay?" Simone's voice cut through the silence one evening as she dropped by unannounced, her concern written across her face. Simone had been a constant presence in Elara's life for years, but Elara hadn't been able to let her in. She had pushed everyone away, even her best friend. "I'm fine," Elara had said, too quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But Simone saw through it. "No, you're not," Simone replied, her voice firm but gentle. She stepped inside and sat down beside Elara on the couch. "You've been like this for weeks, Elara. You can't keep pretending that everything's fine." Elara looked down at her hands, noticing how shaky they were. The truth was, she hadn't been able to pretend anymore. She couldn't even convince herself she was okay. "I don't know how to move on," Elara admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "How do I get over this? How do I move past the fact that Cade used me as part of his test?" Her hands trembled as she spoke, the anger, confusion, and hurt finally spilling out. Simone placed a hand on Elara's, offering her the kind of support she desperately needed. "You don't have to do it alone," she said softly. "But you can't stay here, not like this. You have to find a way to heal, to take care of yourself. For you." not for him. This isn't about Cade anymore. Ilara's eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. She felt lost, disconnected from everything that had once brought her peace. How had she let it get this far? Simone squeezed her hand. "Come on, we're getting out of here. You're coming with me." Simone didn't give Ilara a chance to argue. The moment she stepped into the apartment, she saw the pain in Ilara's eyes, the way she was slowly crumbling in front of her. There was no more time for gentle nudges or patient listening. Simone had been there before, in Ilara's life through all the highs and lows, but now she was going to push Ilara out of this self-imposed prison. "Ilara, you need to leave this place," Simone said firmly, standing with her arms crossed, staring down at her friend. "I don't want to go anywhere," Ilara mumbled, sinking further into the couch. "I just need to figure this out, Simone. I can't just forget about everything. I can't." She stopped herself, swallowing back the tears that were threatening to pour out. "I don't know what to do anymore." Simone shook her head, a soft but determined expression on her face. "That's exactly the problem. You're stuck in your head. You're going around in circles, trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. You can't fix this on your own, Ilara. You've been trying for months, but it's not working. You need a break, a change of scenery. You need to remind yourself of who you are, who you were before all of this." Ilara looked up at her, her heart heavy. It hurt to hear those words, but Simone was right. She had been trapped in her pain, unable to escape the cycles of confusion and hurt, but she couldn't let herself stay there, couldn't keep hiding behind the walls she had built. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Ilara said softly, her voice fragile. Simone was already grabbing Ilara's coat from the hook by the door. "Well, you're coming anyway," she said with a grin. "I'm dragging you out whether you like it or not." Before Ilara could protest, Simone had already helped her into her coat and was steering her out the door. The cool air hit Ilara's face as they stepped outside, the first gust of fresh air in what felt like ages. For a moment, Ilara hesitated, but Simone's grip on her arm was steady, and despite the heavy weight in her chest, Ilara allowed herself to be guided. "You're taking me to the Art Institute?" Ilara asked, glancing at Simone as they walked toward the subway station. Simone nodded. "Yes. You need to see something that'll help you put things in perspective. You need to remember the things that used to light you up before all of this started. Art, beauty, inspiration. There's a reason you used to love going there." Ilara wasn't sure how seeing paintings and sculptures would help her pain, but she was willing to trust Simone. They had been friends for too long for Ilara to fight her now. As they entered the museum, the warm light from the galleries surrounded them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Ilara took a deep breath that didn't feel so suffocating. She had spent so much time in her own thoughts, trapped in the pain of her relationship with Cade, that she had forgotten the little things that used to bring her peace. The simple joy of art, of losing herself in the beauty of someone else's vision, felt like a distant memory. Simone led her through the halls, pointing out pieces that had always captured Ilara's imagination. But it wasn't until they reached a quiet corner of the museum that Ilara's attention was fully captured. There, in front of her, was a painting of a woman walking through flames, her body emerging from the fire with strength and resilience. The woman was walking forward, her face serene, almost determined. It was as if she had been through hell, but she had come out stronger, unbroken. Ilara stood frozen in front of the painting, her chest tightening as the image of the woman mirrored her own inner battle. The flames represented the pain she had endured, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights. But the woman's strength, the way she walked through the fire with purpose, gave Ilara something she hadn't felt in months: hope. "That's you," Simone whispered, standing beside Ilara. "You're walking through your own fire, Ilara, and you're going to come out the other side, stronger than you've ever been." Ilara blinked, her vision blurry as tears welled up in her eyes. It was the first time someone had reminded her of her own strength, the first time she had allowed herself to acknowledge that she was capable of healing, of moving on. "I don't know if I can do this," Ilara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Simone smiled softly, her voice filled with quiet conviction. You don't have to know how yet. You just need to take the first step. Have you ever had a friend pull you out of a dark place? Share your story in the comments below. Elara stood before the painting, her gaze fixed on the woman walking through the flames. The fire swirled around her, but she moved forward with a sense of calm resolve, her eyes set on the horizon. The image struck Elara deep within her chest, a ripple of recognition flowing through her. The flames, the heat, the pain. It all felt so familiar. But the woman's expression, her peaceful yet determined stride, was something Elara had not seen in herself for months. She's me, Elara thought, her breath catching in her throat. I've been through the fire, but I'm still standing. Do you see it now? Simone's voice broke through the silence. She was standing just behind Elara, her words gentle but filled with meaning. Elara nodded slowly, her chest tightening as the weight of the moment hit her. It wasn't just a painting, it was a message. She had been lost for so long in the aftermath of Cade's betrayal, consumed by the pain of what he had done, by the way he had tested her love. But here, in front of this painting, Elara saw a reflection of herself, a woman who could withstand the heat, who could rise above the flames, and who could find herself again. The woman in the painting wasn't destroyed by the fire. She emerged from it stronger, unscathed, and Elara knew that she could do the same. I didn't know I still had it in me, Elara whispered, more to herself than to Simone. Her voice trembled with the realization, but it was also filled with something else, hope. You've always had it in you, Simone replied softly. It's just been buried beneath all the hurt, the pain. You've been so focused on what Cade did to you that you've forgotten who you really are. You're stronger than this, Elara. You've always been stronger. Elara took a deep breath, her heart beating a little faster now. She looked at the painting again, seeing herself in the figure of the woman walking through the flames. She had been through so much, months of emotional neglect, manipulation, and confusion. But now, something was shifting within her. She wasn't the broken woman she had become over the past few months. She was still whole, and she was ready to heal. I don't know where to start, Elara said, her voice shaking slightly with uncertainty. Simone smiled at her, the kind of smile that spoke volumes without needing words. You don't have to know yet, but you will. You're already on the path. You're taking the first step just by being here. Elara turned back to the painting, the woman in the flames now a symbol of everything she needed to be. She had spent so long feeling like a victim of circumstances, like she had no control over what had happened to her. But now, with the image of the woman before her, Elara realized that she could take control. She could rise above this. Thank you, Elara said quietly, turning to Simone with tears in her eyes. I didn't know I needed this. I didn't know I needed to remember who I was before all of this happened. Simone nodded, her eyes full of understanding. Sometimes you just need to be reminded. You're not the pain you're feeling right now, Elara. You're not the betrayal. You're a fighter, a woman who's been through the worst and still has so much strength left to give. For the first time in months, Elara felt something stir inside her, a flicker of the woman she used to be. She had spent so long living in the shadow of Cade's actions, trying to make sense of his cruelty, that she had forgotten the power she held within herself. She was more than just a wife, more than just someone who had been hurt. She was someone who could overcome, someone who could rebuild herself from the ashes. Elara took one last look at the painting, her heart swelling with a sense of purpose. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was going to walk through this fire, and she was going to come out stronger, just like the woman in the painting. Elara's journey is a reminder that our struggles don't define us. They shape us into the individuals we are meant to become. Taking that first step, like she did in the museum, is key to unlocking the strength that lies dormant inside us all. 3 months had passed since the divorce, but for Elara, it felt like a lifetime. She had spent the first few weeks in a haze of pain and confusion, questioning everything about her marriage, herself, and the choices she had made. But now, standing in front of the windows of Calloway Gallery, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. The gallery was her dream, her first step toward reclaiming herself and her life. It was more than just an art space. It was a place for voices that often went unheard, for stories that needed to be told. Elara had always believed in the power of art, in its ability to heal and inspire, and she was determined to create a platform that would give emerging black artists a chance to share their work with the world. Inside, the gallery was filled with paintings, sculptures, and photographs that reflected the diversity and strength of the black community. Each piece told a story of struggle, triumph, love, and pain. Elara had carefully selected each artist, making sure their work resonated with her own journey. She wanted people to come in and feel the weight of the emotions in the room, to feel the rawness and beauty that came from the vulnerability of sharing one's soul through art. As she stood in the middle of the space, Elara took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the room wrap around her. This was her way of starting over. This was her way of healing. She was no longer the woman who had been used, manipulated, and betrayed. She was a woman who had found her voice again, who had risen from the ashes of her marriage and was now helping others do the same. "Elara, this place is incredible," Simone said, her voice filled with awe as she stepped into the gallery. She had been by Elara's side through the entire process, helping her plan, offering support, and keeping her grounded when the doubt tried to creep in. "I can't believe it's finally real," Elara replied, smiling as she turned to face her best friend. "This is more than just a gallery. It's a message, Simone. It's about showing the world that we don't have to hide who we are, that we can stand tall in the face of everything that tries to bring us down." Simone stepped closer, her eyes scanning the walls. "You've created something beautiful here. It's not just about the art. It's about what the art represents. It's about strength. And you, Elara, are the embodiment of that strength." Elara felt a rush of emotion well up inside her. The path to this moment had been long and difficult, but it was worth it. The betrayal had nearly destroyed her, but it had also fueled her. It had forced her to confront her own vulnerability, her own worth, and to reclaim the power she had unknowingly given away. "This place is going to change lives," Elara said, her voice steady but full of conviction. "I'm going to make sure of it." How would you find your power again after betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The gallery opening was a success, and Elara felt like she was on the brink of something new, something powerful. But as the days went on, she noticed a subtle shift in Simone's behavior. Her best friend had been there through every step of the process, supporting her, lifting her when she faltered. But something was different. Simone's usual energy seemed tempered, like she was holding back something important. It wasn't until one evening, a week after the opening, when Elara and Simone were sitting on the couch, sipping wine and talking about the future of the gallery, that Simone finally spoke up. "Elara," Simone began, her voice a little more hesitant than usual, "there's something I need to tell you." Elara turned to her, sensing the seriousness in Simone's tone. "What is it?" "You can tell me anything." Simone hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her glass. "It's about Cade," she said quietly, avoiding Elara's gaze. Elara's heart skipped a beat, the mention of Cade's name sending a wave of discomfort through her. It had been months since she'd spoken to him, but the memory of his betrayal still stung like a fresh wound. "What about him?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. Simone took a deep breath, looking Elara directly in the eyes. "Angela Hendris, Cade's business partner's wife, she told me something. It's not something I wanted to tell you, but you need to know the truth." Elara leaned forward, her heart racing. "Simone, what are you talking about?" Simone put down her glass and leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cade wasn't just pushing you away for the loyalty test. He was already planning to leave you. He had been having an affair with his secretary, Lauren, for months before he even started this whole game with you." Elara's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "Are you serious? That's why he was so distant? He was already involved with someone else?" Simone nodded, her expression pained. "I'm sorry, Elara, I really am. But you deserve to know the truth. Cade was never testing your loyalty. He was testing to see if you'd stick around long. Enough for him to leave you guilt-free. He was using you as an excuse to justify his actions, to make himself feel better about leaving you for someone else." Elara felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath her. The truth hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. All this time, she had believed that Cade's emotional withdrawal was a sign of something wrong in their marriage, that it was about her, about their connection. But the reality was far worse. Cade had been planning his escape all along, and she had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. "Why didn't he just tell me?" Ilara whispered, the tears she had been holding back finally slipping down her face. "Why didn't he just leave if he didn't want to be with me anymore?" Simone's eyes softened with sympathy. "I don't know, Ilara. But he didn't want to face the guilt of leaving you. He thought if he tested you, if he pushed you away, then when you eventually left, he could tell himself it was your choice. He wouldn't have to feel bad." Ilara wiped her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. The anger that had been simmering deep inside her for months began to bubble to the surface. The feeling of being used, manipulated, it was unbearable. She had been nothing more than an emotional safety net for Cade, a crutch that he had thrown away when it no longer suited him. "How could I have been so blind?" Ilara muttered, her voice laced with frustration. "How could I have trusted him?" "You weren't blind, Ilara," Simone replied softly, placing a hand on her friend's arm. "You loved him. You trusted him because you thought he was worthy of that trust, but what he did to you, it wasn't about you. It was about him, about his own insecurities and guilt. And now, you need to move on. You can't keep holding on to what he did to you." Ilara sat back, the weight of Simone's words sinking in. She had spent so much time blaming herself for Cade's behavior, trying to figure out what she had done wrong, trying to fix a marriage that was already broken. But now, she saw it clearly. Cade's actions had nothing to do with her. It had never been about her. It had always been about his own shortcomings, his own inability to be honest and open with her. "Simone, I don't even know who I was when I was with him," Ilara said quietly, her voice full of realization. "I lost myself in that marriage. I lost who I was because I kept trying to make him love me, to prove my worth." Simone squeezed her hand. "You're not that person anymore, Ilara. You're stronger than you were when you were with him. You found your voice again. And now it's time to focus on you, on what you need, on what you want from life. This is your chance to reclaim your power." Ilara could feel the anger rising inside her like a tidal wave. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. It all seemed to come crashing down on her at once. For so long, she had tried to make sense of Cade's actions, tried to justify his distance, to convince herself that there had to be a reason for the emotional coldness. But now, the truth was clear. Cade had never truly cared enough to be honest with her. He had used her, tested her loyalty like she was some kind of experiment, while he had already made plans to leave her for someone else. As Ilara sat in the quiet of her apartment, the weight of her emotions felt like a physical presence in the room. Her chest tightened with frustration, her hands clenched into fists as the realization hit her full force. "I am so much more than this," she thought, her breath coming faster. "I will not let him define who I am." The anger that had been building inside her for months finally had a purpose. It wasn't just rage at Cade for what he had done to her. It was anger at herself for allowing it to go on for so long. She had been so blind, so consumed with trying to save a relationship that had already been broken, that she had lost herself in the process. But that would change now. She wasn't going to waste any more time mourning the version of herself that had been deceived. Ilara was going to take back her life. She was going to channel this anger into something powerful, something meaningful. A few days later, Ilara sat down with a notebook and began to write. She had always been an advocate for women's rights, but now, after everything she had been through, it felt even more urgent. She began to sketch out the idea for a podcast, one that would focus on helping women who had experienced emotional manipulation, betrayal, and gaslighting, a place where women could share their stories, find healing, and support one another. The idea for a safe space for women who had been through similar experiences felt right. It was what she needed too. Ilara had spent so much of her life trying to please others, trying to make things work with Cade, but now she was going to focus on herself and on the other women who needed to hear that they weren't alone. In the days that followed, Ilara set to work. She reached out to other women she knew, friends, acquaintances, and strangers who had also experienced manipulation in their relationships. She created a platform where their voices could be heard. She wasn't just going to let her pain be something that defined her. She was going to transform it into something powerful that could help others. At the same time, she continued to focus on Callaway Gallery. Her business had always been a dream, but now it was becoming more than just an art space. It was a place where women could come together, share their stories, and begin to heal. The gallery's mission expanded to include workshops and events focused on empowerment and self-love. One afternoon, Simone dropped by the gallery while Elara was reviewing some new artist submissions. Elara's mind was racing with ideas for her next podcast episode, and she barely noticed Simone's quiet entrance until she heard the familiar voice speak. "You're doing it, aren't you?" Simone said, her tone filled with admiration. Elara looked up from the papers spread out in front of her. "Doing what?" Simone smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You're turning everything you've been through into something good. You're creating a space where women can heal, where they can find their strength. It's incredible, Elara." Elara stood up and walked over to the wall where the paintings from the latest exhibit were hung. "I can't just sit here and wallow in what happened," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not going to let Cade's actions define me. I'm going to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. I want to help women understand that they don't have to be silent. They don't have to let anyone manipulate them. They can take control of their own lives." Simone stepped beside her, her eyes scanning the artwork on the wall. "You're already doing that. You've turned your pain into something powerful, and I'm so proud of you." Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of gratitude and determination. She had found her purpose, her passion. She wasn't going to let her story be one of victimhood. She was going to help others rewrite their own stories. A few weeks later, Elara's podcast, Rising from the Ashes, launched. It was raw, emotional, and real. She shared her own story in the first episode, explaining how she had been manipulated, how she had been betrayed by the person she trusted most. But she didn't just focus on the pain. She also shared how she was healing, how she was reclaiming her power, and how other women could do the same. The feedback was overwhelming. Women from all walks of life reached out, thanking Elara for sharing her story and offering their own. The podcast became a community of strength, a place for women to connect, support each other, and, most importantly, heal. The day Elara finally saw Cade again felt surreal. After months of silence, months of fighting for her own peace and reclaiming the life that had been shattered by his actions, she had received a message from him. It was simple, just 2 sentences: "We need to talk. Please come by the office." The request was unexpected, but part of her, still clinging to the past, had wondered if Cade was ready to apologize, to explain himself. Perhaps he realized the weight of what he had done. But as she sat in her car, parked outside the sleek glass building where Cade worked, she felt no desire to hold on to what had been. It was too late for apologies. Elara took a deep breath and exited the car, her heels clicking against the pavement with a steadiness that reflected the woman she had become. She wasn't the same person who had once been manipulated by Cade's emotional games. No, the woman walking into that building now was someone who had fought for her own freedom, someone who had learned the invaluable lesson that her worth was not defined by someone else's cruelty. When she stepped into Cade's office, he was sitting behind his desk, as cold and distant as he had been during their last conversation. The tension in the room was palpable, but Elara didn't flinch. She met his eyes and took a seat across from him, feeling a calm certainty wash over her. "Cade," she began, her voice steady, "I've come to realize something." He looked at her with a guarded expression, as though he didn't fully understand what she was going to say. "I'm listening," he said, his tone flat, though there was a flicker of something deeper beneath the surface. Elara leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped on the desk in front of her. "You pushed me away, you tested me, you treated me like a game piece to see if I would stay loyal, but in the end, you didn't win." Cade blinked, his brow furrowing as he tried to process her words. "What are you talking about? I was testing your loyalty, yes, but—" "No," Elara interrupted, her voice firm now. "I wasn't some pawn for you to manipulate. I wasn't a tool for you to use to prove your own worth. Your test didn't break me. It didn't break us. It only set me free. There was silence between them, but this time it wasn't the oppressive silence of the past few months. This was different. It was the silence of closure, of Ilara finally taking control of the narrative. Cade's lips parted, as though he wanted to say something, but no words came. Ilara's gaze never wavered as she spoke, each word stronger than the last. You wanted to see if I'd stay when you weren't giving me anything, when you weren't showing up for me. But I wasn't the one who needed to prove anything, Cade. I don't need to prove my loyalty. I don't need to prove anything to you. Cade sat back, visibly stunned by her words. Ilara could see the realization starting to dawn in his eyes, but it was too little, too late. I gave you everything, Ilara continued, her voice softening but still strong. I loved you, I trusted you, and you betrayed that. But what you didn't realize was that in trying to break me, you made me stronger. You made me realize that my worth isn't tied to your approval. I don't need you to validate me anymore. I don't need your test, your love, or your broken promises. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The years of pain, the endless nights spent wondering what had gone wrong, all led to this moment. And in this moment, she was free. Cade sat silently, his face a mask of confusion and regret. But it didn't matter. His apology, his realization, would not change the truth. Ilara had reclaimed her power. I don't know what you thought would happen, Cade, she said quietly, standing up from her seat, her voice resolute. But I'm done. You've lost me. And now I'm taking back my life. Ilara's confrontation with Cade is an important moment of emotional liberation. In relationships marked by manipulation or emotional betrayal, it's crucial to recognize your own worth and to understand that you do not have to prove your loyalty to anyone. True strength comes from within and is not contingent upon someone else's treatment of you. It's about reclaiming your sense of self and realizing that your value is inherent, not determined by someone's ability to love or respect you. Setting boundaries and walking away from toxic dynamics is an essential step in the healing process. It had been weeks since Ilara had walked out of his office, the finality of her words still hanging in the air. Cade had tried to convince himself that he hadn't lost her. After all, he had loved her once, hadn't he? But the truth settled in, bitter and undeniable. Ilara was no longer the woman he could control, the woman who clung to him, seeking his approval. She had found her own strength, and Cade couldn't stand to admit that he had been the one to push her away. The day Ilara spoke at the Healing Women's Conference was the day Cade's world tilted on its axis. He had received an invitation, not that he truly wanted to go. But part of him couldn't resist. He needed to see her, to understand how she had moved on so completely, while he was left questioning everything about himself. Cade had always seen himself as the one in control, the one who made decisions, the one who steered the ship. But watching Ilara stand on that stage, strong, composed and powerful, was a slap in the face to everything he had ever believed. She spoke with such conviction, her voice echoing in the room, as she shared her journey, her pain and her healing process. But it wasn't the words themselves that struck him. It was the way she had transformed. The woman he had known, fragile, dependent, was gone. In her place stood someone who had found her own purpose, her own strength. Ilara's words were raw, but they were not bitter. They were empowering. I used to think that love meant losing yourself in someone else, she said, her voice steady but emotional. I thought that if I gave everything, if I proved my loyalty, it would be enough. But what I've learned is that true love starts with self-love. And if you can't love yourself, you'll never be able to love anyone else properly. Cade's chest tightened as her words cut through him. He had wanted her to stay, to prove her loyalty, but in the process, he had stripped away her self-worth. How could I have been so blind? The thought repeated in his mind over and over as he watched Ilara address the crowd. She was speaking not just for herself, but for all the women who had suffered, who had been manipulated and controlled, and she was rising above it all. Her voice softened as she continued. Betrayal doesn't just break us, it teaches us who we really are. It shows us our strength, our resilience, and our ability to rebuild from the ground up. So, to all the women out there who feel lost, who feel like they've been discarded, know this: you are not defined by what was done to you. You are defined by your ability to rise again." Cade couldn't tear his eyes away from her. The woman he had pushed aside, the one he had thought would never leave him, was now standing in front of an audience, teaching them how to rebuild their lives after the wreckage he had caused. And the worst part was that he knew it was too late. Ilara had moved on, and he could never go back to the way things were. As Ilara stepped off the stage, the applause filling the room, Cade stood frozen in his seat. He wanted to approach her, to tell her how sorry he was, to beg for another chance. But he knew, deep down, that it was no use. He had already lost her. Ilara stood before the audience, the bright lights of the stage casting a gentle glow around her. She had spoken at several events before, but this one felt different. There was something profound in the air, an energy that connected her to everyone in the room. She wasn't just sharing her story anymore. She was empowering others, showing them the way forward, offering a space for them to find their own healing. As she spoke, the words came easily. They were the same truths she had discovered about herself in the months since her marriage to Cade ended. "Strength is not just about surviving," she said, her voice steady but filled with passion. "It's about rising again, even after you've been broken. It's about reclaiming your life and your power. I stand here today not because I was perfect, not because my life was easy, but because I made a choice to heal and to move forward." Ilara's words resonated with the crowd. Women in the front rows nodded, some even wiping away tears as they listened to her journey, from betrayal to confusion to reclaiming her self-worth. She spoke not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who had walked through the fire and come out stronger on the other side. "The moment I realized I had to choose myself was the moment I broke free," Ilara continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I had spent too many years trying to be what I thought someone else needed me to be. But you know what? You can't be your best self for someone else if you aren't your best self for you first." There was a quiet, powerful stillness in the room as the women listened, their eyes fixed on her, their faces reflecting the same emotions Ilara had felt when she was in the midst of her own struggles. And then, just as Ilara finished speaking, she saw him. Cade stood at the back of the room, his eyes locked onto hers. His presence was like an unexpected jolt, and for a moment, the flood of emotions she had long buried threatened to surface. He had come here after all this time. After everything, he had shown up, standing in the doorway like a man who thought he could walk back into her life without consequence. Ilara's chest tightened, and for a second, she almost faltered. But she quickly steadied herself, a quiet resolve settling in her heart. Cade had always been the center of her world. But now, standing on that stage, speaking her truth, she realized that she no longer needed his approval. She had found her own voice. Cade made his way toward her after the crowd had dispersed, his footsteps heavy on the floor, as though he too was carrying the weight of everything that had happened between them. "Ilara," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of guilt. I didn't expect you to be so strong." Ilara felt her heart beat faster, but it wasn't fear or hope. It was something different, something that had been missing for so long. "Freedom. You didn't expect me to be strong," she repeated, her voice low but firm. "That's the problem, Cade. You never believed in me. You never thought I could be more than just your wife, the one who would always forgive you, always wait for you to come around. But I'm done being that person." Cade opened his mouth to say something, but Ilara cut him off. "I'm done with your games. I'm done with you trying to test me, trying to manipulate me into proving my loyalty. I don't need you. I never needed you to be who I am today." Cade's face softened with regret, and Ilara could see it, his attempt to understand the enormity of his actions. But she knew better now. His regret wasn't enough. "Cade, you've already taken everything you can from me, but you can't have anything more. I've healed. I've built something for myself, for other women who have been through the same thing. And you?" Ilara took a deep breath, her voice unwavering. "You're not a part of my future. You were part of a lesson, but that's all." Cade stood there, looking at her, the realization slowly sinking in. She wasn't just moving on. She was liberated. She had found her power in the ashes of her betrayal, and now she was walking forward, without him. I hope you find peace, Cade. But it won't be with me, Alara said, her voice filled with finality. As she turned and walked away, she felt something inside her click into place. She had let go of him. She had let go of the past. Cade's final attempt to re-enter her life only reinforced the truth that she had already moved on. She was free.